It's completely outrageous that a national park would choose to kill Tule elk when their whole species is at such risk.
So I think it's time to let the elk do their work and restore this to what the mission of a national park should truly be. This is an embarrassment for the national park system.
Under federal law, when you have a federal park, it's required that there be an environmental impact report. In the existence of this park, we have never had one. It's in violation of federal law.
If the cattle ranchers would transition themselves away, they get to be heroes.
I fell in love with Point Reyes National Seashore. It was the first place I ever backpacked, it was the first place I ever camped, and I really just knew instantly that this was a special part of the world. This is actually the largest piece of protected coastline in the United States south of Alaska. It's home to 15% of all California biodiversity. It's really sort of an exceptional place for wildlife. 30% of the land here in our national seashore is leased to private dairy and cattle operations. 30% is a large number for a national park which is supposed to protect wildlife and biodiversity.
The landscape is in terrible condition where the cattle are. It's some of the most degraded habitat that I've seen in my 30-some years of tracking elk throughout their native range in California, so it's pretty bad. The cattle are running the show. Cattle just eat everything, they eat everything down to the ground. So the elk are discriminate feeders. They'll feed a little bit and they shift. They're a grazer and a browser, and so they won't destroy the habitat, and there's not enough of them to do that.
There are over 5,000 heads of cattle in Point Reyes National Seashore, and there are only about 500 elk total in the park. So cows outnumber elk 10 to 1. The elk population is not nearly big enough to be a problem for overgrazing or overpopulation. The elk are down to 1% of their original population.
Right now, we're pushing everything off of the cliff. They're trying to say there's enough Tule elk to kill here at Point Reyes, even when our scientists are saying, no, there's not enough genetic stock. We can't miss a single one. We need them all.
The only reason why the park is planning to kill the elk is to protect the ranching operations here. I was really upset. I figured if I, as a very involved volunteer and wildlife enthusiast, didn't know this was going on, maybe there's a lot of people who don't know that this is going on and they would be upset too. And maybe if we get a lot of people to hear about it, we can change how things are done here. So I founded this campaign, Save the Tule Elk, and I just started doing a lot of public outreach, and it turns out I was right. Most of the public I talk to are completely outraged that 30% of their public land is going to private industry. And most people are outraged at the fact that the National Park Service is planning to kill almost an extinct species to protect dairy and cattle operations.
We have a native Tule elk that's been reintroduced, that was hunted, wiped out locally for the sake of ranching, among other things, that was reintroduced by the park with the idea that when the leases were up on the ranches, that the fences would come down and that the elk would be allowed to free roam and increase their number, and that the park would sort of be returned to the way it was prior to human intervention. The issue we have now is the ranchers don't want to leave. They were supposed to be all gone in the 80s. These ranchers now not only want to stay, they want to have their leases extended, and they want to have the permission to expand their ranches into raising chickens, sheep, and maybe even opening bed and breakfast.
Ranchers here, both dairy and beef, were given handsome payouts. So the land was bought from them, and they were basically given a 25-year time period as a just transition so they could transition their businesses and move off the land. It was always intended that this land would be fully restored. The dairy farmers, as well as the beef ranchers, have continued to be given extensions on their leases, despite the fact that their presence here is really damaging to the land. You can see the visual impact of the cattle on the land by the scarring on the land, the loss of the topsoil. The places where the cattle are, there's very little biodiversity in the plant kingdom. Very few wild animals can go there.
Cattle are just destroying the habitat, and I'm sure most of the visitors here must be shocked, especially out in the pastoral lands, how degraded the landscape is. So I would assume that most of the public would rather see the native tule elk than the exotic cattle, which the public paid to have those ranches removed.
We have at least 23 unique creeks that empty out into the Tamales Bay. Those creeks are habitat to steelhead, trout, and salmon. Those are all being polluted by ranching so that the number of salmon is going down, the steelhead population is going down, and the river otters that eat them have also disappeared from those waterways.
I personally don't want my tax dollars paying to support an industry that's so cruel and so damaging to the environment.
The massive amounts of manure come from these operations every year is just everywhere. They put it into liquefied manure, they put it in sprayers and just spray it over the land. The places where cattle graze, a lot of it just runs down during the rainy season and just runs right into the ocean. They have things called poop lagoons that are just little ponds that the cows poop in, and so that's going to be seeping into groundwater.
So it's just an environmental disaster from an ecological perspective, just what the cattle manure is causing.
The river systems and lake systems here are in the top 10 worst in the state of California.
A lot of times the beaches are actually closed around here. A national park shouldn't be on a list of the most toxic beaches. The intent was that it was to preserve the natural values of this land for the enjoyment of the citizens.
Today I came out here with my wife and twin 5-year-olds. We've been camping in Alima nearby, and I want to show them the beautiful seashore. We're actually out here to see the tule elk so they can know what they are and just enjoy the overall landscape. It's really stunning. Cattle ranching out here on the seashore is not a great place for it. The impact it has on the beautiful seashore, and we have these lovely parks that are supposed to be enjoyed and shared and maintained in the long term, but the impact that they have on the land here is pretty destructive. People can't come and enjoy it if the cows are standing in the way.
We do come out here a lot, and one of the reasons we do come out here is because we love the elk. We love going out to the bluff, especially around wildflower season, and there's nothing like seeing the elk against the water with the wildflowers. The elk just seem to be part of Point Reyes. I would hate for anything to happen to them, and it seems like a really delicate situation that needs to be really thought about before any drastic moves are made, because I think a lot of people come out here to see the elk more than the cattle.
I'm an outdoorsman, like hiking. We hike every weekend and really take advantage of living by all these national parks. Why we live here is to be out here and kind of share the land. I'm against any proposal that would allow them to cull the elk for the ranchers. I'd rather the ranchers go than the elk go. It's a national park, and it should be exactly that. And if they're going to take away the elk, then I'd say the ranchers go before the elk do. Elk's been here a lot longer.
The dairy industry is completely terrible for the environment, and also it's just a cruel practice. Scattered throughout the seashore, you see these tiny plastic enclosures, and in them are baby cows. And the reason why the baby cows are in there is because that's what dairy farms have to do. If the baby cows drink the milk, then we don't get to drink the milk.
Anything that is cruel is unsustainable. anything that's kind is sustainable. So to me, sustainability is about morality. All that we consider to be good is sustainable. All that we consider to be evil is not sustainable.
Dairy cows require quite a significant amount more grass than even a beef cow does because they're milking mothers and they need a lot more nutrients to produce their milk. There's actually not enough land for these dairy cows to just graze and satisfy their appetites. And so there's acres and acres of silage mowing where they mow down grass and they feed it to the cows. And there's been 8 species of birds that have been documented as decreased population after these lawn mowers basically mow over the bird population.
If we just don't have the cows, the land will heal. The land will heal itself. And the Thule elk, they're an apex species. They're a big, important part of that healing.
And one of the main drivers of climate change is cattle grazing operations and dairy operations.
Within the next 12 years, if we don't start reversing climate change, we will definitely hit one of those tipping points, and then there is no stopping climate change. So it's like a runaway train.
As a national seashore, we need to be an example of what wildlife protection looks like and to actually fight climate change. As the climate starts to collapse around us, the more diversity we have, the more resilient the ecosystem is and the more adaptable that ecosystem will be to climate change in the future. Phasing out dairy industry is one way to do that that's very tangible and will be very effective.
And in a national park, they should be the ones on the front line of defense against climate change, protecting the native plants, protecting the native other species that will help restore the landscape and help ultimately fight climate change as well.
I look forward to a time when we actually respect the complex, beautiful nature that was already here. Nature knows how to heal better than we do.